The lace whispered every time I moved my fingers. That was the first thing I noticed that night. Not the music in the ballroom, not the chandeliers throwing gold across cut crystal, not the men in tuxedos speaking softly around violence they pretended was civilization. The gloves. Black lace to the wrist, delicate enough to pass for elegance, thick enough to blur the yellow-green shadows blooming beneath my skin. I had chosen them because they made lying look expensive. "Sophia," Chef Neri hissed, "the swan." I turned from the stainless table and lifted the sugar piece with both hands. Sponge sugar, gold-tinted, balanced on a mirrored platter. A swan with its neck arched like pride. I had worked on it since 4 a.m, burned 2 fingers, cried once in the pantry where nobody could hear me over the mixers, kept going. The charity gala at Hotel Real was for the Conti Foundation, which sounded holy until you knew how men like Federico Conti built holiness out of cameras and fear. I carried the swan into the ballroom through a side door. The room was all white orchids and candlelight and women whose diamonds looked heavy enough to bruise. Palermo's mayor stood near the stage. Priests, businessmen, a judge I recognized from the news, 3 men from the port whose hands were too still to belong to ordinary businessmen, and him, I knew it before anyone said his name. The room changed first. It wasn't noise, it was less than that. It was the particular silence of armed men pretending to be relaxed, heads turning by fractions, waiters straightening. Conversations cutting mid-breath and rejoining in lower tones. Dante Salvator stood near the back of the ballroom in a black suit with no tie, one hand in his pocket, the other resting against his glass without drinking from it. He wasn't the largest man in the room. He didn't need to be. He had the kind of stillness that made other men look temporary. Dark hair, severe mouth, eyes that never wandered without purpose. I looked away too fast. That was my mistake. Looking again would have been worse. "Smile," Federico said behind me. My body reacted before my face did. He appeared at my shoulder with his public smile in place, handsome in the polished, political way cameras loved. Councilman Federico Conti kissed the air beside my cheek for the people watching, his fingers settling at my waist just hard enough to warn me. "You're late with the centerpiece. I had to repair the wing." His smile didn't move. "And your phone, in my locker. I called twice. I was working." The pressure at my waist increased. "When I call, you answer." "I know." He leaned closer, mouth still smiling for the room. "Then prove it." His hand left my waist and caught my wrist beneath the platter, fingers digging through lace, right over the bruise from Tuesday. Pain flashed white. The swan tilted. What I did next would matter more than I knew. I did not gasp. I did not pull away. I tightened my other hand under the mirror base and caught the swan before its sugar feathers shattered. I saved the thing I'd made before I saved myself. Federico felt the flinch anyway, his thumb pressed once, cruel and private. "Well done," he murmured. "You can learn." Then he moved away, smiling at donors, leaving me with a pounding pulse and a perfect sugar swan. I set the platter on the dessert table with hands that wanted to tremble and refused. My chest was tight, my mouth was dry. I told myself the same thing I had been telling myself for months. Not here, not now. Lucia needs another semester. The bakery needs another month. Just breathe. I did not notice Dante Salvator crossing the floor until his shadow touched the table. He stopped on the opposite side of my swan. Up close he looked colder, though he had clearly come in from the summer night. I could smell clean wool, smoke, and the faint sharpness of bergamot under something darker. His gaze went first to the sugar work, then to my hands. "Who made this?" he asked. I swallowed. "I did. One person. Yes." He looked at the swan again, then at me, as if trying to decide which of us was less believable. "It should have broken," he said. "I fixed it." His eyes dropped to my gloved wrist. My skin went hot under the lace. "I've heard you're difficult, Signor Salvator," I said, because nervousness made me talk and silence felt worse under his attention. A flicker, not amusement. Recognition, maybe. "I've heard you're engaged to a man with campaign posters and no discipline." The blood in my face vanished. You shouldn't say things like that at a charity gala. You shouldn't wear bruises to one. My breath snagged. No one had ever said the word out loud. I glanced around. No one close enough. Federico near the mayor. Good, good, you're mistaken. He set his glass down. I'm rarely mistaken. Then tonight can be educational for you. A beat passed. His gaze stayed on me, not my mouth, not my dress, not the performance I'd spent all evening maintaining. Just me. Then he moved, one step around the table, and held out his hand. Dance with me, I stared at it. I'm working. Not anymore. That isn't how kitchens function. Tonight it is. I don't know you, his voice dropped. That is not your real problem. He waited. He did not touch me, and somehow that was worse. If I refused him publicly, Federico would make me pay for embarrassing a guest he feared. If I accepted, I would be placing myself inside a circle of danger I did not understand. The orchestra shifted into something slower. Around us, the room watched without looking like it watched. So I put my hand in his. The contact was immediate, devastatingly precise. His fingers closed over mine, large and dry and careful, and then his thumb slid just beneath the cuff of my glove. He felt it, every hidden fingerprint, every swollen line. The world narrowed to that one touch. His jaw changed, not dramatically, just enough that I knew something had happened. He drew me onto the dance floor as if I had agreed willingly. His hand settled high at my back, not intimate, not gentle, but impossibly controlled. My other hand was trapped between us, his fingers around mine. Don't look at him, he said. You were thinking about him. My heartbeat was so loud I thought other people might hear it. You're making a scene. No, he said. I'm ending one. We turned once under the chandeliers. I could feel Federico watching us from across the room like a blade pressed flat to my spine. You should let go of my hand, I whispered. That would be unwise. Why? His gaze cut down to mine. Because he thinks it belongs to him. Fear moved through me, cold and immediate. Please. The word came out smaller than I meant it to. He stilled just for half a second. For yourself? No. I hated that he heard the truth before I could bury it. My sister is here. In the musicians' gallery. If Federico gets angry now. He looked up, once, toward the mezzanine where Lucia sat with her violin section in borrowed black silk and hoped too big for our family. Then he looked back at me, and something in his face went very quiet. That was the second thing he noticed about me that night, not just that I was hurt. That even now, I was trying to place my body between the damage and someone more breakable than I was. He leaned down slightly, not enough to kiss, only enough to make the air between us feel dangerous. What is your sister's name? Lucia. She'll be home before midnight with 2 of my men behind her car. My heart thudded hard enough to hurt. You can't just decide things. I already did. The song ended. Applause rose somewhere beyond the blood in my ears. Dante did not release me immediately. His thumb traced once across the inside of my wrist where the bruise lay hidden under lace, and the motion was so light it felt more exposing than pain. Lace, he said, the word cold, observational. Go get your things, I stared. What? You heard me. I'm not going anywhere with you. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision. Federico approaching. Dante saw him before I did. Of course he did. He took my hand more firmly, turned us, and faced the man who had been teaching me how quietly a life could close. Councilman, Dante said. Federico smiled without teeth. Salvator. Enjoying the evening? Not particularly. His grip tightened around my hand, not to hurt, to keep. Federico's eyes dropped to where he held me. Sophia, come here, I should have gone. My body knew the pattern. Obey now, pay less later. But Dante's fingers were steady around mine, and for one wild, impossible second, I stayed where I was. Federico's smile thinned. Sophia, Dante answered for me. No, the room changed again. It happened in small ways first. One of the port men setting down his drink, 2 waiters taking half steps backward. The mayor deciding suddenly to be fascinated by the auction catalog. Federico laughed softly. You misunderstand. She's my fiancée. And yet, Dante said, you left fingerprints on her wrist. No one breathed. Federico's eyes flashed to me. I felt the impact like a slap. I should have denied it. I should have saved us all. Instead, I made the smallest mistake of my life. I said nothing. Silence became a complete sentence. Dante looked at me once, only once. Then he turned back to Federico. She leaves with me. Federico's face emptied. That would be a very expensive misunderstanding. Dante's expression did not alter. Try me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply lifted my hand, my bruised, gloved hand, as if the evidence belonged to him now, and walked me off the dance floor. No one stopped us. Not the mayor, not the priests. Not the guards by the door. Certainly not Federico. The hotel doors opened. Night air hit my face. A black car waited with its engine running, and beyond the revolving glass, Palermo glittered like a lie someone had spent centuries perfecting. "Get in," Dante said. My pulse skidded. "I have to tell Chef, done. My sister, protected. You don't know me." He opened the car door and finally looked at me with the full weight of whatever lived behind his quiet. "I know enough." Then he put one hand over the small of my back and closed the first door of my old life behind me. The gate closed with a sound too heavy to argue with. Not a slam, something worse. A final mechanical certainty. Iron teeth meeting iron teeth somewhere behind the cypress trees. While the car kept moving up a curved drive, lined with white gravel and lemon pots large enough to hide bodies, if you had the money for symmetry. I sat very straight in the back seat, my hands in my lap, my black lace gloves now the most ridiculous things I owned. Dante had taken the seat opposite me, 2 facing benches, privacy glass. Enough room for Menace to sit comfortably between us. "I need my phone," I said. "You'll have one." "My phone." "No," I hated how softly he said everything. It made rebellion sound shrill before I even opened my mouth. "Lucia," I told myself, "start with Lucia. If she gets home and I'm not there, she will be told you are staying somewhere safe tonight." By whom? Someone believable. That is not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now. The city fell away behind us. The smell inside the car was leather, night air that slipped in when we turned, and the clean dark scent I'd noticed on him in the ballroom. Bergamot, smoke, cold. I looked out the window so I wouldn't look at his hands. "That man will come after her," I said. "Federico Conti won't know where to look first." That made me turn back. "You say his full name like you've already decided something." A pause. "I have. You don't get to decide what happens to my life." One of his eyebrows moved the slightest fraction. "Your life was being decided by a coward in public office," I interrupted. "You kidnapped me. I removed leverage. That is the same sentence in a better suit." He almost smiled. Almost. Then it was gone. The villa appeared around the bend all at once. Stone, pale under moonlight, with shuttered windows, terraces, and enough silence around it to make the city feel imaginary. Men moved near the front steps in dark jackets. Security, though nobody used the word. The door opened before the driver could circle around. Warm light spilled out over blackened white marble. Somewhere inside, I heard the murmur of a radio and the clink of dishes. I stayed where I was. Dante waited exactly 3 seconds. "Sophia!" I lifted my chin. "If I scream, no one here will be startled." That wasn't the question. "No one here will hurt you." I laughed once without humor. "That sounds almost respectable." His gaze sharpened, but he offered me his hand anyway. The same hand, the one that had found truth through lace. For one humiliating instant, I remembered what it felt like when he'd held me on the dance floor. How carefully he had not hurt me. I took it because I hated stumbling more than I hated him seeing me need balance in 4-inch shoes. His fingers closed, steady. He helped me out of the car as if I were someone important, which irritated me more than if he dragged me. The entrance hall smelled faintly of beeswax and coffee, marble under my heels. A staircase with wrought iron railings curving upward, paintings too old to be decorative. On the far wall hung a crucifix that looked as if it had watched 3 generations confess to murder and ask for good weather in the same breath. A woman in her 50s stood near the archway to the back corridor, arms folded. Dark hair streaked with silver, plain black dress, expression severe enough to iron sheets at 10 paces. "This is Rosa," Dante said. "She runs the house." "Someone has to," she said. Her gaze moved over me, not my dress, not my face, my gloves, then my shoes. Then back to my face, where it lingered just long enough to say she missed nothing and wasted sympathy on no one. "Come," she said. Before Gianni starts pretending he cannot eat after 8, and then eats. A male voice floated from somewhere deeper in the house. "I can hear slander when it's accurate, Rosa." We followed the voice into a kitchen so large my family bakery could have fit inside half of it. Copper pans, hanging herbs. Stone counters cool as tombs, a long oak table. At the far end stood a man with pretty brown eyes, rolled shirt sleeves, and the offended posture of someone betrayed by carbohydrates on a spiritual level. He held a celery stalk as if it had insulted his mother. "This," he announced to nobody and everybody, "is not food. This is what food eats." "Then stop chewing it," Rosa said. He sighed the sigh of a saint enduring martyrdom and turned to me. "You must be the emergency." "I'm sorry. Everyone is moving too quickly and the boss has that face." He put down the celery with tragic resignation. "Gianni Rixai." Logistics, timing, moving parts, and apparently comedy when no one appreciates art. "Don't flirt with houseguests," Rosa said. Gianni pressed a hand to his chest. "Rosa, if I were flirting, the room would know." "It knows," she said dryly. "That's the problem." Against my will, the corner of my mouth threatened to move. Dante noticed. Of course he did. "Food," Rosa said to me as if issuing a command. "Then upstairs." "I'm not hungry." "You look breakable." "Sit." That apparently was how one lost arguments in Dante Salvator's house. Not with force, but with the total absence of interest in your refusal. I sat. Rosa put a bowl of broth and torn bread in front of me. The steam smelled of fennel and chicken and home, which nearly undid me more than fear had. I kept my gloves on. Gianni took the chair across from me and eyed the bread with longing so theatrical it bordered on prayer. "If I die," he said, "tell people it was courage." "Not butter. No one will believe that," Rosa said. "Cruel woman." "Hungry man." I glanced at Dante. He stood by the counter, not eating, speaking quietly to Marco DeSantis. Broad-shouldered, scar along the jaw, the kind of face children either loved instantly or ran from. Security, certainly. Marco looked at me once with something close to apology, then returned his attention to Dante. There was a rhythm in the room, orders given low, doors opening and closing. Men passing through without lingering. No shouting, no swagger. That frightened me more than chaos would have. Controlled violence had better tailoring. I tasted the broth. My body, treacherous thing, nearly cried with relief. "I need to call Lucia," I said. "You will," Dante answered without looking at me. "After she arrives." "Arrives where?" "Somewhere safer than the apartment Federico pays for." The spoon stopped halfway to my mouth. "He doesn't pay for it. He holds the mortgage under a shell company through your bakery debt." Dante turned then, as if my shock had finally earned eye contact. "Did you think I took you from a ballroom without learning the room around you first?" I set the spoon down too hard. "You investigated me. I investigated him, and found me attached like an invoice." Silence. Then, very quietly, he said, "I found a woman hiding bruises under lace gloves at a charity event built on money Conti launders through church restoration contracts and port fees." "You were not an invoice." My throat went tight. I hated that it did. "You don't know why I stayed." "No," he said. "Not yet." That "not yet" slipped under my skin more efficiently than any threat. Marco stepped closer to the table. "Your sister's car has been intercepted 2 streets from the conservatory. Our people are with her. No incident." I exhaled so suddenly it hurt. "She's all right," Marco nodded once. "Shaken, angry probably, breathing." I pressed my gloved fingers to my lips. Dante watched the motion and then looked away first, which I had not expected. Rosa handed me a folded linen napkin. "Eat before you faint and create paperwork." "That is not how fainting works," Gianni informed her. "In this house it is." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The room went still for half a second, not because laughter was forbidden, because mine had not belonged there until then. Dante looked at me, not the cautious gaze he'd used in the ballroom, something more focused, as if the sound had revealed a seam in armor he'd been testing with a knife. I looked down at my soup. When I finished, Rosa led me upstairs to a room larger than the apartment I shared with Lucia. Pale walls, linen curtains, a carved wardrobe, a bed with a quilt the color of old cream. On the dressing table lay a small box. "What is this?" I asked. "Clothes," Rosa said, "and gloves that don't look like a funeral." My face heated. "I didn't ask for charity." "This is not charity," she said. "This is planning, learn the difference." She left me with that. I had just peeled off one glove slowly, the lace catching at my swollen wrist, when there was a knock at the open door. Dante, he did not enter fully. He stood at the threshold as if even he understood there were lines that changed rooms when crossed. "Your sister wants proof you're alive," he said, holding out a phone. I took it too quickly, our fingers brushing. Heat flashed up my arm, absurd and immediate. I hated my body for keeping records I hadn't agreed to store. Lucia answered on the first ring. "Sophie, I'm here. Where? Safe." "That sounds fake," I laughed weakly. "It does a little." She whispered then, voice shaking. Federico went to the apartment. Men were outside before he arrived. They told him nothing. One of them looked like he could break a car in half. "Marco," Dante said from the doorway. I glared at him and turned away. "Listen to me. Stay where they tell you tonight." "I don't like this." "Neither do I." A beat, then softer. "Did he hurt you again?" The room blurred for a second. "No, not tonight, at least not in the old way." When the call ended, I handed the phone back. Dante's gaze dropped to my bare wrist. The bruise had darkened. His jaw went hard in that same almost invisible way. "What are your rules?" I asked before I could stop myself. He lifted his eyes. "For what?" "For being kept alive by a man I never asked for." Something moved in his face. Approval, maybe. That I'd said it plain. "You eat," he said. "You sleep, you don't leave the estate without me." "I don't agree to that." "You don't have to." "Then it isn't a rule." "It's a prison." "No," his voice stayed even. "A prison keeps you where you don't matter. This keeps you where you do." The answer struck something in me I wasn't ready to name, which made me angry. "I want the door unlocked." "It is." I stared. He stood aside a fraction, enough to show me the hallway, empty and lit. No key in the lock, no bolt. "Try the gate if you like," he said. "But if you leave before I deal with Conti, he'll collect you before the city breathes twice." That was the quietest threat I had ever heard, and the most honest. He turned to go. "Why did you call me that?" I asked. He paused. "Call you what?" "Lace." His head angled slightly, moonlight catching the cut of his cheekbone. "Because you hide sharp things under delicate ones." Then he looked once at my bruised wrist, once at my face, and added, with a calm that felt like possession and warning in equal measure. "You don't leave this house without me, Lace." Morning in Dante Salvator's house began with quiet footsteps, bitter espresso, and the faint scent of gun oil hiding under lemon polish. I woke before 6, because fear had trained my body into obedience long before I met a Mafia boss. For one full minute, I lay in the huge bed staring at the ceiling, wondering whether the night before had been one of those dreams that feels expensive and terrible right up, until daylight makes it ridiculous. Then I turned my wrist and saw the bruise. Reality, unfortunately, had excellent memory. The room was cool, marble under my bare feet. I dressed in one of Rose's chosen outfits, a cream blouse, a dark skirt, sensible shoes, and stared at the box of new gloves beside the mirror. Pale gray lace this time, softer, finer. I left them untouched. Downstairs, the kitchen was already alive, bread warming, coffee machine hissing. Rosa directing 2 maids with the authority of a woman who could probably negotiate ceasefires or funerals with the same expression. She looked up. "Good. You have color." "I'm naturally argumentative, it keeps blood moving." One corner of her mouth almost changed. "Coffee first." Revolution later. Gianni was at the table with a notebook, 2 phones, and an expression of personal betrayal. "Rosa has made sfogliatelle," he told me mournfully. And because God likes drama, I began a no-sugar month yesterday. Rosa set a plate in front of me. Men invent suffering when life grows quiet. He pointed at the pastry. That shell is laminated with butter. That is why it is worth living. Despite myself, I smiled. See, Gianni said. She understands me. I feel seen in my illness. What illness? I asked. Hope, Rosa said. The laugh escaped before I could manage it, and for a second the kitchen stopped feeling like enemy territory. Then Dante entered. No announcement, just a shift in the room. Marco straightening from the far doorway. Gianni sitting up. Even the maid by the pantry going quieter around the silver tray in her hands. Dante wore charcoal trousers, white shirt, sleeves buttoned, no jacket. He looked less like a man who ruled half the port and more like the reason people invented the word severe. His gaze found me at once, dipped briefly to my bare hands, then returned to my face. You didn't wear the gloves. I put down my coffee. Observation must be one of your many talents. It keeps people alive. I'm touched. Something unreadable passed through his expression. Eat. I hated that my body responded to his voice as if it were structural. Sit. Breathe. Stay. So I picked up the pastry. The layers shattered beneath my teeth with that perfect whisper only good pastry makes. Butter, orange zest, sweet ricotta, a trace of cinnamon. I closed my eyes before I meant to. When I opened them, Dante was watching me. Do you always look at people while they chew? I asked. Only when they're deciding whether to tell the truth. I set the pastry down slowly. That was unfair. Yes, Gianni muttered into his coffee. At least he admits when he's unbearable. Gianni, Dante said. Silence, Gianni translated to me. A beloved language in this house. Rosa handed Dante an espresso. He didn't drink it. That caught my attention immediately. The smell reached me before the cup did. Dark roast, cardamom, and beneath it something off. Faint, chemical, bitter at the wrong register. My head lifted. Don't, I said. Everyone looked at me. I stood so fast the chair scraped. That isn't right. Dante's eyes narrowed. Meaning, I crossed the room before thinking about what courage cost here. Took the cup from his hand before he could stop me. Brought it to my nose. Cardamom, yes. Burnt sugar from the machine, yes. And underneath, something metallic sour. Not enough to smell unless you spent your life learning how sugar turned the air before it colored, how cream split before it curdled, how one bad almond spoiled 40 good ones. There's sedative in this, I said. Gianni blinked. That is a sentence I was not expecting with breakfast. Marco moved first, taking the cup from me. Dante didn't move at all. You're sure? He asked. I'm not guessing. How? I looked at the dark surface in the porcelain. Because coffee should smell alive. Silence followed. Then Dante turned his head slightly. Marco was already gone, shouting for the staff who had touched the tray. My pulse rose late, as if only now catching up to the fact that I just grabbed a Mafia boss's drink out of his hand in his own kitchen. Gianni looked impressed in a way that probably signaled danger. Well, you may stay. I wasn't aware I'd applied. No one applies, he said. The boss simply stares until destiny organizes itself. Gianni, yes, respectful fear, I remember. Dante set the untouched saucer on the counter. He looked at me for a long moment, not with heat exactly, though something in the room warmed and tightened anyway, more like recalculation. What else can you taste? He asked. Mostly disappointment. That made Gianni choke on his coffee. Dante's mouth almost moved. Almost. Rosa, who clearly believed no crisis excused bad pacing, put another pastry on my plate. Finish eating, she said. Men make worse decisions when women in kitchens faint artistically. I don't faint artistically. There is still time. The sedative led nowhere useful by noon. One kitchen porter dismissed. One supplier questioned. No answers. Which meant what I feared. Someone inside the house or inside the supply chain had been testing the edges. Outside, the estate glittered in hard Sicilian sunlight. Olive trees, gravel paths, a long terrace overlooking the sea in the distance, blue and indifferent, beautiful enough to be offensive. Rosa found me in the secondary kitchen later that afternoon, standing in front of a steel table stacked with sugar, chocolate, cream, blood oranges, and silence. "You asked for the pastry pantry," she said, "so use it. I'm thinking. Thinking is not labor. It is in my family." She folded her arms. "Show me." So I did. Sugar calmed me because it punished dishonesty. Too cold, it seized. Too hot, it burned. Too much force, it shattered. If your hands shook, the sugar told on you. I cooked it to amber. Pulled it into ribbons with gloves over my fingers now, not lace, but thick kitchen protection. Made fine lattices, rose petals from tempered chocolate. A shell so thin it cracked with a spoon's breath. When Rosa tasted the finished dessert at dusk, she said nothing for nearly 10 seconds. Bitter chocolate base, blood orange cream in the middle. Sugar lace dome over the top. "What is it called?" she asked. I looked at the fragile shell catching the light. "I don't know." From the doorway, Gianni said, "Name it after my suffering." "Then people will cry and eat more." Rosa ignored him. "What is it?" I thought of the outside holding, the hidden bruising, the sweetness I distrusted in myself now. "Mercy," I said quietly. Rosa's eyes lifted to mine. She understood too much. Gianni, unfortunately, also existed. He took a bite and closed his eyes. "If this is mercy, I forgive everyone. Even carbohydrates." That evening, Dante came home smelling of city air and old stone. I knew he was in the house before I saw him. Men's voices shifted. Doors changed their rhythm. I was wiping down the steel table when he stopped in the pastry doorway. He did not speak immediately. His gaze went to the sugar lace dome, the name card beside it in my uneven handwriting. Mercy. "What is it?" he asked. "A dessert. I can see that. Then our conversation is progressing." He stepped farther in. The kitchen suddenly felt much smaller than it was. Rosa had disappeared with the instinctive wisdom of someone who enjoyed survival. Gianni had also disappeared, though I heard him in the corridor telling a maid in a tragic whisper that he would die unloved and underfed. Liar. Rosa would murder him before hunger could. Dante looked at the dessert again. "Why mercy?" I dried my hands on a towel. "Because it looks strong on the outside. And the most fragile part is hidden." Something moved in his face then. Not surprise, recognition too close to hurt. He reached out. For one suspended second, I thought he might touch my wrist. Instead, he picked up the spoon and cracked the sugar shell. The sound, thin, crystalline, ran through me. He tasted it. Said nothing. That was worse than praise. Because when Dante Salvator said nothing, it meant he was feeling more than he intended to show. He set the spoon down carefully. "Conti has friends at the port," he said, "and someone is moving product through church shipments under his foundation. You were standing in the middle of it." I felt cold all over. "I bake desserts. You also notice what other people miss." He looked down at my hands, today bare and honest under kitchen light. "Sugar burns, fine scars, bruises fading ugly. There's a fundraiser at the chapel house tomorrow," he said. "You're coming with me." That wasn't a request. "No, why?" His gaze lifted again. Quiet. "Precise, dangerous. Because whoever tried to drug me this morning did not do it for coffee." He looked at the dessert, then at me. "They did it because you're here." For the first time since he took my hand, I understood that my being seen had made me a target in a much larger room. And somewhere in that room, someone had already started moving against us. Dante, he had wanted her the first moment he saw the swan tilt and her hand save it before itself. Wanted was the wrong word. Needed to understand it, maybe. Needed to stand between that instinct and the men who would weaponize it. In his world, pain made people protect themselves first. Sofia Belandi had done the opposite. And now someone inside his house had noticed that he noticed. That made her dangerous to them, and disastrous to him. The chapel house belonged to Dante's family in the way old power belongs to men who never fully leave God alone. It sat above the water on a bluff east of Palermo, attached to a small private chapel with a bell tower and a courtyard paved in worn stone. There were lemon trees, saints in alcoves, and enough armed men disguised as drivers and assistants to make the place feel less holy than strategic. I wore pale gloves that morning. Not to hide from Dante. He had already seen too much. But because walking into a room full of people who might know Federico felt easier if part of me remained covered. The lace whispered when I flexed my fingers. Dante's head turned slightly at the sound as we crossed the courtyard. Ridiculous, the things I had begun to notice. The exact weight of his silence. The way his hand hovered near my back without touching unless stairs or strangers made it necessary. The temperature shift in a room when he entered. The fact that he never once asked if I was frightened, as if fear were obvious and therefore not worth insulting with questions. Inside, the reception rooms smelled of polished wood, espresso, and candle smoke from the chapel next door. Women in expensive linen discussed donations and restoration funds. Men shook hands over maritime insurance while pretending not to speak in code. Somewhere in that house, there were ledgers, favors, threats, and a list of names nobody would ever say into a phone. "This is where honest men become architectural," Gianni murmured at my elbow. I startled. "What?" He adjusted his tie with the grave dignity of a man performing tragedy. "They donate stone, windows, marble saints. It helps them feel less criminal. Personally, I prefer a cannoli and emotional accountability. Neither of which you possess," Rosa said, as she passed with a clipboard. Gianni put a hand over his heart. "Rosa, before witnesses?" She did not even slow. "Especially before witnesses." Despite myself, I smiled. Dante looked back at us from the hallway entrance, just once. Long enough to register that Gianni was doing what Gianni apparently considered service to humanity, keeping panic from hardening into silence. Then, we were led into the main reception room. I saw Federico immediately. He stood beneath a painting of the Virgin, with a councilman's practiced smile and a glass of white wine in his hand, as if public money and private cruelty were both family traditions. His gaze landed on me and did not move for a full second. The old instinct hit first: make yourself smaller, lower your eyes, smile enough to avoid the scene. Then Dante stepped half a pace closer to me. He did not touch me. He simply occupied the space a threat would need to cross first. Federico's expression altered by the smallest degree, not fear. Calculation forced to reroute. "Signorina Belandi," he said, "you left the gala abruptly." I kept my spine straight. I wasn't aware departures required filing. Gianni made a strangled noise that might have been admiration and might have been self-preservation. Federico's smile sharpened. "You had obligations." "Did she?" Dante asked. The room cooled. Federico shifted his attention. "Salvator, still protecting lost things." Dante's face did not change. "Only the ones men mistake for theirs." My pulse beat high in my throat. Federico's eyes moved to my gloves. "Those are new." I hated that my skin reacted as if he had touched me. "Yes," I said. "Pity I liked the black pair." Dante moved then. One step, that was all. But Federico stopped speaking as if a door had quietly closed in his face. "Take your drink elsewhere," Dante said. No raised voice, no scene, just a sentence so final it seemed to lock the air around it. Federico looked at me one last time, and in that look lay 6 months of quiet damage and a promise that this was not finished. Then he smiled, inclined his head like a gentleman carved from wrought, and drifted toward the donor corridor. Only when he was gone did I realize I had been holding my breath. "You all right?" Gianni asked softly. "No," I said. "Excellent, we are all honest for once." Dante's hand came to the center of my back then, brief, firm, not intimate. A warning to the room and somehow a steadiness to me. The touch changed everything, not because it was tender. It was too controlled for tenderness. But it was the first time he touched me where pain did not already live. I looked up. His gaze was on the corridor Federico had disappeared into. "Stay near Rosa. I'm not furniture." "No," he said. "Furniture listens less." Then he was gone into the adjoining hall with Marco and 2 men I didn't know. Rosa found me near the chapel doors 10 minutes later, pretending to study a donor plaque. "He is looking for records." "He?" I asked. "Do not make me define obvious things before noon." I followed her into the side chapel because obedience was easier when she phrased it like contempt. The room was cool and dim, candles guttering beneath saint statues. A young priest arranged papers at the altar rail. The silence there felt older than the men using the house. Rosa stood beside me, both of us facing the rows of pews. Marco has known Dante since prison transport vans and worse shoes, she said. If he tells you to run, run. The hairs rose on my arms. Why are you telling me that? Because you are beginning to mistake controlled men for safe ones. I turned to her. Do you think I'm stupid? No, I think you're tired. It is adjacent. Before I could answer, raised voices bled in from the hallway beyond the sacristy door, too muffled to make out words. Male, one of them Federico's, another lower, colder, Dante. I shouldn't have moved closer. I knew that. But curiosity and dread are cousins, and both wear my face at bad times. I went to the narrow balcony overlooking the side corridor. From there, I could see the hall below through carved stone lattice. Dante stood with Federico at the far end, near a table piled with restoration brochures and silver trays. No one else visible. Which did not mean they were alone. You touched what I took from your floor, Federico was saying. My stomach turned. Dante's voice came quiet as a blade sliding free. Careful, you don't think I know what she is? Federico asked. A debt, a family with one useful daughter and one talented liability. She was grateful once. Dante did not move. That was the frightening part. His stillness never broke before other people's did. Federico smiled thinly. You won't keep her interested. Men like you mistake rescue for romance. Dante stepped forward. No rush, no spectacle. Federico actually took half a step back before he could stop himself. Say her name again, Dante said, and I will forget where we are. The words moved through me like cold water. I should have left the balcony then. I should have gone downstairs and pretended I had not heard my life discussed like territory between wolves. Instead, I stayed, and the balcony rail gave a tiny crack under my hand. Not enough to collapse, enough to betray me. Both men looked up at once. I jerked backward in shock. My heel caught the edge of the stone step. The world tilted. A sharp, stupid little sound left my throat as I stumbled. And Dante was there before I understood how he had crossed the space. One moment the corridor was below me. The next his arms were around me on the landing outside the side stair, my body hitting the hard line of his chest instead of stone. My glove snagged against the front of his shirt, lace whispering. His hand locked around my bare forearm where the glove had shifted, covering bruises and pulse and trembling all at once. Stand still, he said. I could not tell if he meant because I was shaking or because he was. I'm fine, I whispered. You nearly were. Behind him, Federico had stopped at the foot of the stairs. He looked up at us with open dislike now, the polished mask abandoned for a second too long. Something old and terrible crossed Dante's face. Marco appeared from nowhere, placing himself between the stairs and Federico with the ease of a man who had rehearsed catastrophe for years. Councilman, Marco said. Time for you to leave. Federico's gaze slid to me. Sophia, you should be careful what men you make enemies of. I don't know what expression crossed my face, but Dante felt it. His hand tightened around my arm, not enough to hurt, enough to remind me I was not facing this staircase alone. She didn't, Donnie said. I did. Federico's smile returned, false and polished. Then I suppose we'll see which one of you pays for it. He turned and walked away. Only after the sound of his shoes vanished did Dante look down at me. We were too close. My palms were flat to his chest. I could feel the steady pound of his heart under linen and muscle and discipline. His hand remained at my arm. His other was at the back of my neck, broad and hot and impossibly careful. A lock and a shelter in the same gesture. Neither of us stepped back. This was one of those moments I would later remember too clearly. The crack of the old stone rail, the scent of candle wax drifting up from the chapel, the rough warmth of his thumb just below my ear. The shock of finding that danger could also be the place my body stopped panicking. His gaze dropped just once to my mouth. Mine dropped to his, almost. Then Gianni's voice floated up the stairwell like a curse God had grown fond of. If anyone is dying romantically, please schedule it after lunch. Rosa says I may have one olive and I'm losing the will to negotiate. Dante closed his eyes for half a second. A laugh burst out of me, breathless, startled, impossible to hold back. When I looked up again, something in his face had changed. Not softened, it would have frightened me less if it had, but the hard control had cracked by exactly one fraction. He lowered his hand from my neck, slowly, as if speed would say too much. Stay away from balconies, he said. That was nearly concern. That was architecture. I should have said something clever. I should have stepped back first. Instead, I heard myself ask, very softly, did he mean what he said? Dante's jaw tightened. About debts, I asked. About Lucia, his eyes held mine. Yes, the truth landed hard and clean, not because I hadn't suspected, because hearing it from him meant the fog was over. Federico had never planned to marry me. He had planned to keep us both where our gratitude could be extracted monthly. My hand slid from Dante's chest. For a second, he looked almost angry at the loss of contact. Or at himself for noticing it. Then the moment closed. He gave one short instruction to Marco from the top of the stair. Men moved below. The house shifted into a new pattern. The fast mystery had snapped shut. Federico was not merely cruel. He was laundering money through the foundation and using my family's debt as leverage. There would be no return to misunderstanding after that. As Dante guided me down the stairs with one hand hovering at my back again, not touching unless I swayed, I understood something else. Tenderness had entered the story in the middle of a threat. That was worse than if he had kissed me. Because now I would spend the rest of the day remembering exactly how safe I had felt in the arms of a dangerous man. By the time we returned to the villa, the sky over Palermo had gone white with heat, and my nerves felt rubbed raw by sunlight. No one said much in the car. Gianni, sensing a mood too sharp even for him, confined himself to muttering about electrolyte balance and emotional starvation in equal measure. Rosa looked out the window. Marco took calls in a voice low enough to pass for weather. Dante sat across from me and watched nothing visible. I kept thinking about Federico saying debt as if it were another word for ownership. When the gates opened, I saw Lucia before the car fully stopped. She stood in the courtyard in jeans and a conservatory sweatshirt, violin case at her feet, chin lifted in the posture she wore when fear was trying to dress as fury. She had my mother's mouth and my father's stubbornness, and none of the instincts that had taught me how to survive carefully. I was out of the car before anyone could open the door properly. Lucia, she ran to me and collided hard enough to hurt. I held her tighter because I needed proof she was real and unbroken and here. Her hair smelled like shampoo and city dust and the inside of her violin case. You disappeared with a mob boss, she hissed into my shoulder. Do you understand how insane that sounds? Completely. She leaned back and grabbed my wrists. Her eyes dropped to the gloves, then lifted, furious and wet. Take them off. Lucia, take them off. The courtyard had gone too still. Dante had stepped out of the car. Marco and Gianni remained by the fountain. Rosa quietly dismissed 2 house staff before they could become witnesses with opinions. I removed the gloves. Lucia stared at the bruises like she could unsee the last year if she looked hard enough. He did this yesterday, I said nothing. Her face changed. Not just yesterday. Lucia, how long? The question broke something because there is no good answer to how long have you been hurting alone. I swallowed. Long enough, she stepped back as if I had struck her. You lied to me. I managed. You lied. I kept you in school. I would have quit. I know, I snapped. That's why I didn't tell you. Silence hit the courtyard flat. The truth was ugly in daylight. Federico had taken over the bakery's debt after Papa's stroke, offered legal help, then rent assistance. Then campaign catering contracts we could not afford to lose. By the time I understood the shape of the trap, Lucia's tuition, and the bakery and our apartment all sat in folders under his polished hand. He never hit my face. That was how men like him thought of themselves as civilized, Lucia's breathing turned uneven. You let him touch you so I could play violin? No. The word came out too fast, too fierce. I let him think he owned the future. There's a difference. She looked at me like she hated me for making her understand, which was fair. I hated it too. The next voice came from behind me. How much? Dante asked. I turned. He had not raised his voice. He had not come closer. But every man in the courtyard seemed to lean inward around the question. Lucia wiped her face angrily. 32,000 in debt. 8 in tuition arrears. Bakery equipment leased under a company tied to one of his donors. And before you ask, yes, I checked. I'm not decorative. Dante's gaze shifted to me. You knew she could do that, Lucia answered before I could. Do what? Follow shell companies, she blinked. Of course I can. You think conservatory students only cry and vibrato. For the first time since I'd met him, Dante looked genuinely surprised. I let out a breath I hadn't meant to turn into a laugh. That would be my sister's version of charm. Lucia folded her arms. And what is yours, exactly? Being abducted in couture? Gianni made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a swallowed snort. The crisis might have sharpened into something unbearable if a black sedan had not swept through the gate just then, too fast. Marco's hand went to his jacket. The car stopped hard. A driver I didn't know jumped out, pale. Boss. The word carried wrong. Dante moved before the man reached him. What? Bakery on Via Caldera, the driver said. Front windows smashed. Fire in the prep room. We got there fast, but I did not hear the rest because the world had already tilted. No, Lucia grabbed my arm. Sophie, no. I was halfway back to the car when Dante caught my elbow. You're not going alone. That's my bakery. It's also your trap. I don't care. I know. That stopped me because he said it like a fact and not a criticism. 10 minutes later, we were in the city again. Sirens somewhere in the distance. Palermo blurring by in heat and stone, and scooters slipping between lanes like bad ideas. My stomach stayed high in my throat the whole way. The bakery smelled wrong before I saw the blackened prep room. Sugar should smell warm, caramel deep, forgiving. Burned pastry has its own grief, fat, ash, fruit cooked past hope. The front display glass had been kicked inward. Flour dust mixed with extinguisher powder across the floor. The brass bell over the door hung crooked. I stood in the wreckage and thought absurdly of the first day Papa let me pipe buttercream roses by myself. I had been 12. My hands shook so hard he laughed and told me fear only meant I was paying attention. Lucia crouched near the register, gathering music sheets she had apparently left there last week. Her hands shook now, mine didn't, that was worse. It was meant to scare us, Marco said quietly after checking the alley and back entrance. Not kill. Comforting, I said. Dante remained near the doorway, speaking to 2 men from his city crew. He looked too large for the broken sweetness of the place. Too clean, too ruthless. And yet, every damaged thing in the room seemed to align itself around him as if waiting for judgment. My gaze caught on the prep board. A message had been cut into the flour with a knife tip. Come home quietly. Lucia saw it at the same time I did. Her inhale went sharp. He wants us scared. He wants me obedient, I said. I heard Dante's shoes behind me only when he stopped. Not anymore, he said. I turned. You don't understand. This is what he does. He never begins with the thing that matters most. He starts around the edges. Bakery, rent, tuition. Then Lucia's strings cut before an audition, or a review sent to the wrong paper, or a pharmacist who suddenly misplaces a prescription. He makes survival feel expensive until gratitude starts to look easier. The words came too fast, too many, nervousness and confession holding hands. Dante listened without interruption. When I finished, he looked at the message in the flour and then at the shattered display case. And you stayed in front of that for a year. I stayed in front of Lucia. Something changed in his face. It wasn't pity. He would have insulted me less with contempt. It was understanding. I hated how much that mattered. A crash sounded in the alley. Marco spun. Dante shoved me behind him so quickly my breath caught. Men moved. A shout. 2 footsteps. Then one of Dante's guards dragged in a teenager in a delivery uniform holding a jerry can and terror. I didn't know, the boy cried. I just got paid to splash the alley. I swear, Marco took the can, sniffed. Fuel. Dante's voice went colder than anything I had heard. Name. The boy gave 3 in a row before landing on one that seemed real enough to keep. I should have left it there. Let the dangerous men do dangerous things. Instead, I stepped sideways around Dante's shoulder. How much did they pay you? I asked. The boy stared at my face, then my bruised wrist, then the man partly in front of me like a wall built by God in a bad mood. 200, he whispered. I reached into my ruined office drawer, found the envelope of bakery petty cash the vandals had missed, and counted out every euro still dry. Take this. Everyone in the room looked at me. The boy blinked. Why? Because if they paid you 200 to burn a family business, someone else will pay you 400 to lie about what happened next. So you're going to tell Marco who hired you, what car they used, what route they took, and then you are going to disappear to your grandmother's house or a convent or Mars. Pick one. Gianni, who had arrived halfway through the scene with a bottle of water and horror in equal measure, whispered, I love her a little. Quiet, Rosa said, though she sounded less annoyed than usual. The boy talked. Within minutes, Marco had names, a scooter plate, and one of Federico's lower campaign aides implicated far enough to matter. Dante looked at me as if I had just turned into something with edges he had not accounted for. I understood that feeling. I was surprised too. Back at the villa that night, after Lucia had been settled in the guest suite next to mine, and Rosa had bullied food into all of us, I went to the pastry kitchen, because grief always made me need my hands occupied. Dante found me there, no guards, no audience, just him in the doorway and me elbow-deep in flour and pear compote. You should be sleeping, he said. You should be terrifying someone. I already did. I did not ask who. That was beginning to be its own kind of corruption. He looked at the tart shell I was blind baking. What is this, pear and rosemary? For what occasion? I shrugged. Survival, probably. He stepped closer, not enough to trap me. Enough that I could smell the night on him, cold stone and smoke over bergamot. Enough that I became aware of where his hands were. At his sides. Empty, controlled. You surprised me today, he said. That must happen rarely. It happens almost never. The admission struck low and strange. I focused on trimming pastry edges. Lucia does the books and finds patterns. I do flavors. Between us, we almost pass for one functioning adult. He watched my hands work. Why didn't you ask anyone for help? The answer took too long because the honest version shamed me. Because by the time you understand you're in a cage, you've usually already told everyone you're fine. Silence stretched. Not empty. Full. Then his fingers touched the back of my wrist. Not the bruised underside, the unmarked skin above it. A current ran through me so immediate I nearly dropped the knife. He must have felt it too because his hand stilled. Did not leave. Did not advance. His thumb rested where the pulse fluttered too fast. Almost. He looked at my bare hand dusted with flour, then at my face. Don't cover them for me. My throat tightened. I'm not. No, he said softly. You're not. For one impossible second, I thought he might lean down. Instead, he stepped back. Restraint can sound louder than desire when a man uses it like a weapon against himself. I found the first accountant who signed Conti's shell filings, he said. He'll talk, and then we see how much of Palermo wants to survive him. He turned to go. Dante. He stopped. I did not know what I wanted when I said his name. Thanks, maybe, or stay. Or don't be the kind of man who makes me feel safe in a room full of knives. What came out was smaller than all of it. Thank you for bringing Lucia here. He looked back at me, eyes dark in the kitchen light. You still think this is about gratitude, he said. Then he left me with flour on my hands, my pulse in chaos, and the first true suspicion that betrayal was already moving inside his walls. War announced itself in small failures before it arrived with bullets. A camera near the east wall went dark at 2:11 a.m. One of the kitchen delivery logs vanished from the office printer. A driver who had worked for Dante's family 7 years called in sick, and then boarded a ferry to Naples with too much cash in his pocket. Marco said these things over breakfast as if listing weather shifts. By lunch, the sky had turned the white blue of Sicilian heat, and every man on the estate moved like a spring wound too tight. Lucia played violin in the music room because fear needed somewhere to go that wasn't conversation. The sound drifted through the corridor in long, aching lines that made the house feel briefly human. Rosa pretended not to listen. Gianni stood outside the door with a protein biscuit he despised and wiped his eyes when he thought no one was looking. "I have allergies," he said when he caught me seeing him. "To Tchaikovsky?" I asked. "To vulnerability." He lowered his voice. Rosa asked if I wanted lunch. "That sounds normal." In her tone, it was practically a proposal. I laughed. "You're impossible. I'm trying to be husband material. It requires optimism and reduced pasta." "Tragic. Thank you. Finally, respect." He followed me toward the back terrace carrying a folder and the wrong kind of confidence. "The boss is in a mood. He seems frequently in one. This one is special. He has the face he gets before someone loses property rights or fingers. That is not helpful. It is, if you are not the one losing fingers." The terrace overlooked the olive grove. Heat shimmered over the gravel path. Cicadas screamed in the trees. Beyond the wall, the sea flashed like a knife being turned. Dante stood near the balustrade with Marco, Vittorio Greco, and two men from the port. Vittorio was handsome in the way certain predators are handsome. Smooth, courteous, impossible to read if you mistook polish for character. He had been in and out of the villa since my first day, always with calm eyes and a voice like old money. Something about him made me colder than Federico did. Maybe because Federico wore his rot openly once you knew where to look. Vittorio was cleaner. Men like that scare me more. Dante glanced over as I stepped onto the terrace. His gaze moved to the folder in my hands. "What is that?" "The bakery supplier invoices Lucia found in the old office box. The church wine account overlaps with one of Federico's storage companies." Vittorio smiled faintly. "Your little baker has become an auditor." The words were light. The contempt under them was not. I felt Dante's attention sharpen without turning toward him. "She has a name," Dante said. Vittorio spread his hands. "Of course." But he looked at me differently after that, not with desire. With calculation, as if I had become untidy evidence. I handed the folder to Marco instead. Dante dismissed the others with a glance. Marco stayed 2 more seconds, then took Vittorio and the port men with him. I noticed, not for the first time, that Marco obeyed Dante with loyalty. Vittorio obeyed with interpretation. There is a difference, if you live long enough. When we were alone, except for the cicadas and the armed men pretending distance, I leaned on the stone rail. "Your people don't all like me." "No, that was refreshingly quick. They don't have to like you. Only obey me." His gaze rested on my face. "No one here is confused about who gives orders." Heat climbed my neck. "And yet you keep letting me hand you information. Because you're useful." I looked away too fast. He noticed. Of course he did. The silence stretched. Olive leaves flickered silver-green in the hot wind. "Is that all?" I asked. "No," I waited. He did not continue. "That's cruel." "Yes." Then the first shot cracked through the grove. A stone exploded inches from my hand. Dante had me down before the sound finished arriving. His body hit mine hard enough to drive air from my lungs as he took us behind the balustrade, one arm locked around my shoulders, the other drawing his weapon with terrifying efficiency. More shots. Men shouting, Marco's voice somewhere to the left, Lucia screams from inside the house. Gianni astonishingly yelled, "If I die on no sugar, I will haunt all of you." Dante pressed me flat to the stone. "Stay here. That's insane. It's an instruction." He tried to move. I grabbed his sleeve. This was my mistake and my revelation at once. "Don't." He looked down at my hand clenched in his shirt. There are moments when terror strips language to its bones. I did not say don't leave me. I did not know enough yet to be that honest. What came out cost me anyway. "If you go," I whispered, "I won't know where to breathe." Something in his face broke. Only for a second. Then he covered my hand with his, once crushingly brief, and rose into gunfire. The world shattered into noise. Marco dragged me through the terrace doors toward the inner corridor while Dante and 2 guards moved into the grove. I heard 3 more shots, a body hitting gravel. The metallic stink of blood entering hot air. Lucia ran toward us from the music room, white-faced, violin bow still in her hand like a ridiculous weapon. "Downstairs," Marco ordered. "No," I said. He looked at me as if considering tranquilizing me. "This is not a debate." Then a gunman burst through the side garden door, everything narrowed. He was young, fast, wrongly placed. His eyes found me first. Lucia screamed. The bow in her hand flew before thought could catch it. It struck the man's wrist. His shot went wild into the ceiling. Marco lunged. I grabbed the silver serving tray from a console table and slammed it into the gunman's face with a force born entirely of panic and pastry wrists. He reeled. Marco finished it. Silence hit hard. Lucia stared at me. "You hit him with a tray. You assaulted him with Vivaldi." Her laugh came out hysterical and half-sobbing. Mine did too. Then Dante came back inside. There was blood at his collar. Not all of it his, I thought immediately, which says terrible things about how quickly a person can adapt. His gun was still in his hand. His eyes went to Lucia. Then to me, then to the dead man at Marco's feet and the dented serving tray in my grip. "You stayed," he said to me. "I was ambushed, not seasonal." His gaze dropped to the tray. "You hit him." I panicked constructively. Lucia made a small choked sound that might have been agreement or trauma. Marco, incredibly, looked as if he might smile. Dante stepped close. Too close for the corridor and too public for the way my body registered it. Blood streaked the back of his hand. "You're hurt," I said. "Not badly." That wasn't an answer. I reached for his wrist before I could think better of it. He went still when my fingers touched his pulse. The cut ran along his forearm, shallow but ugly. "Sit," I said. "I'm fine. You're bleeding on Rose's floor." That somehow moved him. He let me lead him into the small downstairs study, while Marco took Lucia to Rosa, and Gianni announced to the ceiling that if anyone shot near his kidneys again, he would file a complaint with heaven. I cleaned the cut at the sink in the study bar with hands that shook only once. Dante sat in a wooden chair, shirt cuff unbuttoned, forearm in my lap. His stillness had changed, less public now. More dangerous because it contained pain and chose not to display it. "This happened before," I said quietly, seeing the old scar crossing his wrist, white and roped. "Not this cut." "Something else?" He did not answer immediately. "My sister," he said at last. "Bianca." The name settled between us. I looked up. His gaze was fixed on the far wall, not me. I was 19. A man I should have killed sooner wanted to teach me patience. He found her instead. Broke her hands with a hammer and left her where I would hear her before I saw her. The room seemed to lose oxygen. I could not speak. "She lived," he said, "but she never played piano again. She never touched a door without checking who might be behind it. 3 years later, she swallowed enough pills to make the rest of us quieter." My eyes burned so fast I hated them for it. That was the specific shape of him, not generic grief, not some elegant wound romance could decorate. A sister's hands, broken because of him. A life measured forever after by what he had failed to reach in time. It explained everything I had not been able to name. Why he saw my wrists before my face. Why his control felt like penance. Why violence sat in him so neatly, as if ordered around a single, rotted beam he could never replace. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He looked at me then, and I understood that he did not permit many people to see him after saying her name aloud. His thumb brushed the edge of my glove where it lay on the desk, pale lace collapsed on wood. "Do you know what I noticed first?" he asked. I should have said no. Instead, I held still. "At the gala," he said, "when Conti hurt you." The room contracted. "You saved the sugar swan before yourself." My breath caught. "In my world, pain makes people clutch what they can keep. You protected what was fragile first." His voice dropped. "Then you tried to protect your sister from him before you protected yourself from me." I could not move. That, he said, almost to himself, was the beginning of the problem. He lifted his uninjured hand, touched my face. Just the backs of his fingers along my cheek, careful as if I might shatter in a different way than sugar. My whole body went still around the contact. His gaze fell to my mouth, mine to his. The air between us changed shape. Almost, he stopped himself. I saw it happen in real time. The hunger, the decision, the cost. He lowered his hand. I should check the perimeter, he said, voice rougher than I had ever heard it. I did not know whether to be grateful or devastated. Dante, he paused at the door. I had never initiated anything. I still didn't, not really. I only let the truth out badly. When you came back inside, I said, looking at the blood on his cuff instead of his face, I was more frightened by the idea that it might not be you. His eyes closed once. When he opened them, the nickname landed differently than it had before. Still in possession, no longer cold. Lock the study door, Lace. Then he left, and War arrived at the estate before sunset. After the Olive Grove attack, the villa changed from guarded to fortified. Men I hadn't seen before appeared at the gatehouse and along the rear wall. Deliveries were opened on the gravel and searched under awnings, while Rosa complained that nobody respected Peaches anymore. Marco slept in 2-hour fragments and started carrying a second phone. Lucia practiced less and watched windows more. Even Gianni stopped joking during meal briefings, which frightened me almost as much as the bullets had. By the third day, Dante had tied Federico publicly to 2 shell companies and 1 offshore account used to move church restoration money through the port. The newspapers called it a corruption inquiry. Men in Dante's world called it pressure, but pressure only made certain cracks visible. It did not stop blood. I learned that the hard way on a Thursday afternoon. Marco had driven Lucia to a secure lesson with an old conservatory instructor who owed Rosa a favor and God at least 3. I stayed at the villa because Dante had looked at the weather, the patrol rotations, and me in the same sweep and said, "Not today." I hated how much I wanted to obey him when he did that. The air smelled like rain that hadn't decided yet. I was in the pastry kitchen laminating dough because butter and precision kept my thoughts from mutiny. Gianni stood nearby eating slices of cucumber, with the expression of a man being persecuted by wellness. "If I die before 40, he said, tell Rosa it was because she loved me too little and fiber too much." "She doesn't love you at all," I said. He pressed a hand to his chest. "Then why does she know my coffee order?" "Because it's loud." He considered that. "Fair." The side door slammed. Marco never slammed doors. I turned before the sound finished. He stood there with blood on his shirt. Not his. I knew immediately because my body had learned the hierarchy of terror and gone straight to the center. "Lucia," I said, already moving. "She's alive," Marco said. My knees nearly gave. "Where is she?" "In the car, minor cut, shock." His jaw tightened. It was a staged traffic stop near the station. 2 men in police jackets. "We got one, the other got away." I was past him and into the courtyard before he finished. Lucia sat in the back seat of the SUV, wrapped in one of Rosa's wool shawls despite the heat. Face colorless, except for a thin line of blood near her temple. Her violin case lay cracked on the seat beside her. "Sophie." I climbed in and took her face in both hands. "Look at me." She did. Her pupils were wide. Her hands shook once and then again. "I'm fine," she whispered, which is how people sound when they are not. Marco said something to one of the guards. The world around me kept moving. It offended me. Dante arrived from the main house with Vittorio at his shoulder. He saw Lucia, saw the blood, saw me. Whatever lived under his control went glacial. "Inside," he said. Lucia caught his sleeve before he could turn away. "They said your name," he stilled. "What?" "The men at the stop. They said tell Salvatore this is the girl he chose." Silence took the courtyard by the throat. Dante's eyes closed once, opened colder. I understood then what Chapter 7 was always going to be, though I did not know it in those words. The cost of being close to him had reached the one person I had been trying to keep outside the blast radius. That evening, after Lucia had been stitched, sedated, and bullied into broth by Rosa, I packed a bag. Not dramatically. Not because I had ceased loving the living. Because a line had finally been crossed in bright enough paint that even denial could not smooth it over. A sweater, jeans, the envelope of cash from the bakery office, my knife roll. One pair of black lace gloves I had not thrown away, because throwing things away does not undo what happened in them. I carried the bag downstairs myself. Dante was in the library with Marco and 2 maps spread over the table. Vittorio stood by the window. Rain tapped the glass in hard little warnings. Dante looked up first. His gaze dropped to the bag. No, the single word almost undid me because part of me wanted him to make leaving impossible. That would have been easier. Then I could have blamed captivity instead of choice. But if I stayed, I needed it to be because I walked back in myself. You said the gate was unlocked, I said. It is. Good. Marco looked at Dante once, then very deliberately left the room, taking the others with him. Even Vittorio drifted toward the hall, his expression unreadable. We were alone except for the rain and the maps and the weight of things that had become too real to survive on implication. She was almost taken, I said. I know, because of me, because of him, because I'm here. Dante came around the table, slow, no threat in the movement which made it worse. If you walk out tonight, he said, Conti will try again before dawn. Then I'll stop being the reason he uses my sister as leverage. You still think leaving subtracts you from the equation. His voice stayed low. It doesn't, you don't know that. I do, I laughed once, sharp and ugly. Of course you do, you know everything, my debts, my bakery, my bruises. My breathing schedule, apparently. His face tightened. Sophia, no, I stepped back. You don't get to calm me down because you make quiet look ethical. Lucia was bleeding in your car. At that, something cracked visibly in him. Do you think I don't know what that looked like? I think you are good at carrying things you should not survive. The room went still. Rain, breathing, the old clock by the hearth. He stopped 2 feet away. No closer. If you need to hate someone tonight, choose me. But don't lie to yourself about what the road outside those gates becomes. I'm not lying. My voice broke on the second word. I hated that. I'm trying to make one decision that doesn't put her in front of bullets. His eyes dropped to the bag, then returned to my face. Then take her, leave Palermo. I'll clear the road to Rome myself. I stared. He meant it. That was the unbearable part. He meant it enough to offer the thing he wanted least. And you? I asked. His answer came without hesitation. I stay, because this was his city, his war, his dead, his guilt, all the things he would marry before he married peace. I understood then that leaving was real, not a test, not a trick. I could walk out of the villa with Lucia and never hear his voice say lace again. I could go north, change names, work in kitchens that didn't know the sound of gunfire. Build a life on practical things and chronic fear. And some part of me would remain in this room with the maps and the rain and the man who had put his body over mine in the olive grove and stopped himself from taking comfort he wanted because I mattered more than his wanting. That frightened me more than the guns. I can't take Lucia and run forever, I said. You can try. She'll hate me. She'll live. The word landed like a bargain with God. I looked at the bag in my hand. My old identity fit inside it too easily. Girl who endured, sister who managed, woman who mistook survival for a plan. I set the bag down. Not because Dante asked me to. Because suddenly leaving felt less like courage and more like handing the future back to men who used fear as administration. He saw the exact second I made the decision. His shoulders changed. Not relief. He was too disciplined for relief to show first. It looked more like pain passing through a locked room and failing to stay hidden. If I stay, I said, I stay knowing what this costs. Yes, no lies, no strategic omissions. If Lucia is at risk, I know. If I am a target, I know. If someone in this house is dirty, I know that too. His eyes sharpened at the last line. You think there is. I think attacks keep arriving through walls that know your name. For a second I thought he might argue. Instead he nodded once. All right, I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt like something softer had just been buried with my own hands. At that exact, devastating moment, Gianni poked his head through the door, took in my face, Dante's face, the bag on the floor, and the maps. He stopped. "This seems private and dramatic." No one answered. He winced. "Excellent, I'll make it worse." He cleared his throat. "Rosa says if anyone plans to continue the war before dinner, do it outdoors." "The veal is resting." I stared at him. He looked at me with genuine concern hidden under nonsense. "Also, if you leave. I have to reorganize the pantry again, because grief makes the boss forget lunch, and then I forget lunch, and then Rosa says we're all becoming emotionally expensive." A noise came out of me that was half laugh, half breaking. Gianni seemed relieved. "Good, human sound, continue." He retreated. Dante looked toward the doorway and then back at me. "I should fire him." "You won't." "No." The rain hit harder. I wiped at my face angrily. "I'm staying for Lucia." "I know. That isn't the same as staying for you." A pause. Then very quietly, "I know." The truth of it made my chest ache because neither of us fully believed it anymore. Later that night, I sat by Lucia's bed while she slept and watched the rise and fall of her breath until mine matched it. Outside, the guards changed shifts. Inside, the house held its own pulse. I had reached the real exit point and chosen the darkness with open eyes. No one had trapped me. That was what made it irreversible. The next betrayal arrived dressed as help. 3 days after the station attack, Marco came to breakfast looking like a man who had not closed both eyes at once in a week. Dante was already at the table, untouched espresso cooling near his hand, Vittorio across from him with a file open, and that same polished calm that made my skin think of knives hidden in silverware. Lucia slept late for the first time since childhood, sedatives and shock finally collecting their debt. Rosa declared the house quieter and therefore less annoying. Gianni said grief had improved everyone's cheekbones and was asked to leave before he finished the sentence. Marco placed a burner phone beside Dante's plate. "Accountant from the Restoration Trust. He'll talk in person, says he has the shipment ledgers and the harbor schedule." "Where?" Dante asked. "Old Ferry Warehouse at Sant'Erasmo, noon." Vittorio glanced up. "Convenient," Marco's jaw flexed. "Too convenient." Dante looked at the phone, then at the courtyard beyond the windows where olive leaves flickered in sea light. "Maybe. We go anyway." I should have stayed out of it, I knew that, but my life had become an ongoing argument with what I should do. "The church wine account," I said. "If the accountant really has the harbor schedule, it will include the charity storage lockers." Federico kept saying the chapel house was built on donations. He wasn't bragging. He was signaling. Vittorio's gaze moved to me. "You hear patterns everywhere now. I hear the ones men assume women won't." Something unreadable passed across Dante's face. Approval, perhaps. Or fear that I was becoming too visible. "You're not coming," he said. I opened my mouth. "No," he said again. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The word landed like a hand at the center of my back, steering me away from the cliff. So of course I broke the rule. Not immediately. That would have been childish. I waited until they left in a convoy, and the estate exhaled around their absence. Then, I went to Lucia's room to tell her I needed 10 minutes in the office to review the bakery insurance forms. It was a bad lie. She knew it. I knew she knew it. "You have the face," she said from the bed, pushing hair out of her eyes. "What face? The one where you're about to do something loving and stupid. That is insulting. It's genetic." I hesitated at the doorway. "Sophie," she said softly. "Come back." I smiled in a way that must have looked more convincing than it felt. "Always." Gianni caught me in the side corridor halfway to the garage. He was carrying a plastic container of sliced fennel with the expression of a condemned philosopher. "You are sneaking." "I'm walking with intent." He lowered his voice. "The difference is footwear." "Gianni." He looked at my jacket, the keys in my hand, the pulse in my throat. Then, to my surprise, the comedy dropped from his face. "If this is about helping, let Marco do his job." I can read ledgers faster than men who think corruption needs cologne. That may be true. He shifted the fennel to his other hand. Still not comforting. I'll be careful. That sentence has buried nations. Then he sighed like a man whose emotional support plan had collapsed. Take my car, the blue Alpha. Less obvious, I blinked. Why are you helping me? Because if you go in the Fiat, Dante will know before the gate opens, and if you don't come back. I'll have to explain to Rosa why I assisted Destiny on an empty stomach. I laughed despite the fear. He pressed the keys into my hand. Bring the car back without bullet holes, he said. I'm trying to look employable. The old ferry warehouse smelled of salt, diesel, and wet rope. I parked 2 streets away and came in on foot through the market side, keeping my head down and my nerves hidden under motion. The harbor was loud with gulls and crates, and men pretending not to notice who owned which corner. The warehouse itself crouched near the waterline, rust flaking from its side doors, old ferry company logo ghosted above the loading bay. I heard voices inside. Dante's, low and even. Marco's, sharper. Another voice I did not know. I slipped through the side entrance and into shadow behind stacked pallets. The accountant stood near a steel table with a folder in his hands, sweating through his shirt. Dante faced him. Marco was 2 steps off his left shoulder. Vittorio stood farther back by the loading doors, one hand in his jacket pocket, expression unreadable. I want protection, the accountant was saying. You'll have it if this is real, Dante said. It's real, locker lists, priest signatures, Conti's offshore routing, everything. He set the folder down. I leaned forward to see the cover page. That was when the side door slammed behind me. Every head turned. Dante's face changed first to fury, then to something much worse. Move, Marco barked. Too late. Men flooded the catwalk above. At least 6. Guns already raised. The accountant went down before he could scream. One shot to the throat. Red everywhere. Marco shoved Dante behind an overturned crate and fired upward. The warehouse exploded into noise. I ran for the nearest concrete pillar as splinters and rust rained from the rafters. My shoulder hit hard. Pain flashed. I bit down on a cry because sound was a map, and I refused to become one. Get her out, Dante shouted. Then I saw Vittorio, not firing upward, not taking cover, watching me. The cold realization arrived complete. He had known. He stepped into my path as I bolted for the side corridor. His face remained calm, almost regretful. You should have left when you had the chance. My breath stopped. Dante mistakes mercy for intelligence sometimes. He caught my wrist. You made him sentimental. I tried to wrench free. He tightened exactly where the bruise memory still lived. The old panic flared, then rage arrived behind it, hot and clean. You sold Lucia's root, I said. I sold a correction. Monster. His smile was thin. No. Mirror. The word struck, because I remembered the way Dante had once described men who taught lessons through the vulnerable. Vittorio was not different from him in method. Only in what he called justifiable. That was why he frightened me. He was what Dante could have become if grief had rotted every soft thing completely out of him. Gunfire cracked somewhere to my left. Marco shouted. Dante's voice came again, closer now, murderous in a way I had not yet heard. Vittorio dragged me through the side passage toward the loading dock stairs. Quietly, Sophia. Or I drop one of Salvator's men for every scream. I wanted to say something brave. Instead, I went silent because silence can be its own blade. He forced me into a van parked by the outer dock. The door slammed. Diesel roared. We tore away from the harbor before Dante could reach the loading lane. I sat on the floor between crates, wrists zip-tied, mouth dry, heartbeat wild. Across from me, Vittorio wiped blood, not his, from his cuff with a handkerchief as if leaving a luncheon. You're making a mistake, I said. He tilted his head. That's what women say to men after they realize they're not being courted. I was never stupid enough to think you courted anyone. A faint smile. Good. The van turned hard. My shoulder slammed steel. Why? I asked. Because Dante was becoming inefficient. He had Conti cornered and still made room for you. Men like him cannot survive divided. So you betray him. I spare the city a weak king. I laughed once, shaking. He'll kill you. Maybe. Vittorio folded the handkerchief exactly. But first he will have to decide how much of himself he is willing to look like while doing it. There it was, the mirror, clean and ugly. The van stopped after what felt like forever and was probably 20 minutes. An old inland property. Stone walls, one room with barred windows and the smell of damp and mice. They cut the ties only to chain my ankle to a radiator pipe. I took stock because panic without inventory is just drowning. One chair, one sink, one cracked mirror, a loose screw at the window latch. Hairpins in my braid. The small ceramic saint mounted near the door, my body mostly intact. Fear immense but not fatal. I heard the men outside talking. Conti's name, a handoff. Nightfall, good. Talking meant time. I worked one hairpin loose with my teeth and started on the screw. Every scrape sounded too loud. My fingers shook. My shoulder throbbed. I kept going. At some point the door opened and Vittorio returned alone. He looked at the saint on the wall, then at my hands. Still trying to save fragile things first? The words froze me. He knew. Dante had said it aloud to someone, or Vittorio had watched more carefully than anyone realized. Either possibility felt terrible. You're wrong about him, I said. Vittorio crouched in front of me. No, I'm right about what he will become. He already isn't you. For the first time the polish cracked. Not much, enough. He was, Vittorio said. Once. Then he stood and left me in the dark with the screw half loosened, and the knowledge that betrayal had not come from the obvious rot. It had come from the man polished enough to pass for reason. By the time night fully fell, I had one wrist free, a cut across my thumb from the metal edge, and footsteps approaching the door. Too Late hovered at the threshold. The first thing I heard was not gunfire, it was a church bell, one strike, then another, close enough to vibrate through the wall. I sat very still in the dark room, free wrist hidden behind my back, ankle still chained to the radiator pipe. The screw from the window latch dug into my palm. Sweat cooled at my spine. Outside the door, men argued in low voices. One wanted cigarettes. One wanted instructions. Neither sounded happy. A church nearby meant a village, or a private estate with too much God and land. Sicily had both. I counted heartbeats between the bell strikes. 5, then silence. The saint by the door stared down at me from chipped plaster. I considered asking for help and decided the man with the gun would answer first. The key grated in the lock. A guard entered carrying a bottle of water and the kind of boredom that gets men killed. He was older than the harbor gunmen, heavier, less alert in the shoulders. He expected fear. He expected passivity. He expected, perhaps, the version of me who had spent a year making survival look quiet. He bent to set the bottle by the chair. I drove the loose screw into the back of his hand. He howled. I kicked the chair leg into his shin, snatched the dropped key ring, and went for the ankle chain with hands shaking so hard I nearly missed the lock. He lunged. I got the chain free half a second before he reached me. The radiator pipe came loose with a scream of metal. I swung it on instinct and panic. It caught him across the temple. He went down. I stood there panting over a man I had just felled with plumbing, the pipe trembling in my hands. Then I ran. The corridor outside was narrow, damp, lit by one naked bulb every 10 feet. I took the stairs 2 at a time, bare feet slapping stone because I'd lost one shoe in the van and fear had made the other irrelevant. Above me, the bell struck again. I burst out into cold night and found myself in the courtyard of an abandoned monastery. Of course, a bell tower, cracked cloister arches, ivy, a sweep of dark hills beyond the wall. Cars in the gravel, men by the outer gate shouting because someone at the perimeter had just discovered they were not alone. Headlights swung across the courtyard. Then came the first suppressed shot. Not from Vittorio's men. Marco, I knew it instantly because hope has a sound once it starts carrying your name. Chaos detonated around the monastery, men yelling, tires on gravel. One body dropping near the fountain. I ran for the cloister shadow because staying open was dying stupidly. A hand caught my arm in the dark. I reacted before thought. The radiator pipe came up. Lace, Dante. The pipe clanged harmlessly against the wall as all the strength left my knees at once. He was there, breath hard, coat open, gun in one hand. The other already at my face, my shoulders, my wrists, checking faster than speech, mud at his cuff, blood at his collar, eyes black with something far beyond anger. "I'm here," I said, though maybe I needed to hear it more than he did. His forehead almost touched mine. For one savage second, neither of us moved. Then gunfire ripped across the courtyard and motion came back. "Can you run?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." No embrace, no declarations. Just his hand locking around mine and dragging me through the cloister as Marco and two guards pushed from the gatehouse side. I ran, not because he arrived, because I still belonged to my own legs. A man stepped out from the refectory doorway with a weapon raised. I saw him first. "Left," I snapped. Dante pivoted, fired once, and the man dropped. He glanced at me. Something fierce and disbelieving flashed through his face. Then we kept moving. At the chapel transept, Marco intercepted us. "North wall compromised. Vittorio's taking the tower." Of course he was. Men like him always preferred height and symbols. Dante looked at me. "With Marco?" "No." Both men stared. I heard myself continue because terror had burned the unnecessary parts off my voice. "He'll use the ledgers or Lucia or me as time. If he gets to the tower archive first, he burns the evidence." Marco swore softly. "She's right." Dante looked as if he wanted to argue with reality itself. Then he nodded once. Behind me, we crossed the courtyard under covering fire, cut through a side sacristy, and climbed the bell tower stairs into dust and echo. Old stones spiraled upward, cold under my feet. My breath tore in and out. Dante moved ahead of me with lethal economy. Marco covered the rear. Halfway up, we found a dead monk's library room converted into storage. Crates, filing cabinets. Church records, one metal locker forced open. The ledgers were here. So was Vittorio. He stood by the arched bell window with one hand on the open locker and a gun in the other. Wind moved his coat. Bell rope swayed beside him. Moonlight turned his face into something carved. "You brought her," he said. Dante stepped into the room. "You're finished." "Don't say finished before the body cools." "It sounds amateur." Marco angled left. I stayed low by the stair arch, heart slamming so hard I thought the bell might answer it. Vittorio's gaze flicked to me. "You should have stayed home, Sophia." "I tried that. Men kept misbehaving." He smiled faintly. "Even now." Dante did not smile. "Drop the gun," Vittorio laughed. "And let Palermo fall into the hands of a man who has forgotten ratios." "What ratios?" "The essential one," Vittorio said, eyes never leaving Dante's. "How much innocent suffering a city requires to remain governable." The words chilled the room. That was his theology. Neat, efficient, unforgivable because he believed it. Dante's voice dropped. "You used a girl." "I used leverage. You did too, once." The accusation landed because it had truth inside it. Dante had built his empire with fear before he learned the cost of certain methods. That was what made Vittorio a mirror instead of a cartoon. But mirrors fail when the man looking into them chooses differently. Dante took one more step. "Not anymore." Vittorio's attention shifted, fractionally, fatally, to me. He had underestimated one thing all along, that I would not remain still while men translated my life into strategy. The bell rope hung 2 feet from my shoulder. I yanked it. The bell above us crashed into motion with a sound so enormous it seemed to rip open the sky. Vittorio flinched. Marco fired. Vittorio's shot went wide into stone. Dante closed the distance like judgment. The fight was ugly because real fights are. No elegance, no speeches. Just men who knew too much about damage colliding in a room too small for mercy. Dante drove Vittorio into the locker. Metal screamed. Guns skidded. Marco kicked it away. Marcus got a knife free from somewhere inside his coat and slashed. Dante took the cut along the ribs and kept going. I saw the ledger pages sliding from the locker, loose. I lunged for them. A second guard appeared in the stairwell below, raised his weapon toward Dante's back, and everything happened too quickly for grace. I threw the metal lockbox from the archive shelf with both hands. It smashed into the guard's wrist. His shot tore into the ceiling. Marco finished him. Silence hit one beat later, except for the bell still trembling above us. Vittorio lay on the stone, breathing badly, blood at the corner of his mouth. Dante stood over him, knife in hand, chest heaving once. For one terrible second, I thought I would watch him become exactly what Vittorio had predicted. Vittorio laughed weakly through blood. "There you are." Dante looked down at him with a face I will never fully forget. "No," he said. Then he handed the knife to Marco. That was the choice. Not mercy exactly. Not innocence returned. Something harder. A refusal to let the mirror claim authorship of him. He turned away from Vittorio and came to me instead. The ledger pages shook in my hands. So did I. He touched my face once, then my hair, then my shoulders, as if verifying that each part remained attached to the world. His own blood was warm through his shirt. "I had a pipe," I said stupidly. His breath left him in something that was almost a laugh and almost pain. "I know." Then he kissed me, not because the war was over. It was, not because I had been rescued. I was standing on my own feet. He kissed me because too much had happened for almost to remain survivable. It was desperate and brief and devastatingly careful in spite of both of us. His mouth met mine like a truth withheld too long. My hands clutched his shirt because balance had become theoretical. He tasted of adrenaline and blood and cold night air. The world narrowed to pressure and release, and the shock of being wanted by a man who had spent 6 chapters stopping himself. When he drew back, his forehead rested against mine. "You're alive." The words broke me more than the kiss. "So are you," I whispered. Below us, men moved through the monastery. The last of Vittorio's people were being collected or buried. The ledgers were real. Federico's network had shape. The final villain was stepping fully into view because now there would be no one left to hide him behind polished intermediaries. Dante took the pages from my shaking hands and passed them to Marco. Then he looked at me with the full, ruined honesty of a man who had nearly lost the one thing he had no right to need. "Don't do that again, Lace," I should have promised. Instead I said, "Then don't make me." His eyes closed once. When they opened, they were softer than I had ever seen them, which frightened me more than his violence ever had. We both knew one of us still might not survive what came next. By dawn, the monastery raid had become a rumor in 3 neighborhoods and a prayer in 2 churches. By noon, the ledgers were copied, secured, and spread across Dante's library table in stacks that smelled of mildew, salt, and imminent ruin. Locker codes, shipment dates, foundation transfers, priest initials, doc assignments. Federico had not simply laundered money through charitable restorations. He had moved weapons through consecrated freight and hidden the routing under donor marble and stained glass. Palermo would call it scandal. Men like Dante called it permission. Federico ran for the harbor that night. Of course he did. A cornered man does not go home. He goes where the exits have always been hidden. Marco found the movement first. 2 trucks diverted from the West Road. 3 burner phones active near the old customs warehouse. 1 priest missing from the chapel accounts and conveniently discovered with a passport. He could not possibly have packed himself. Rosa made everyone eat before sunset because, in her words, "No one wins wars fainting over principle." Gianni consumed 3 bites of braised veal and announced it might be worth dying for if heaven had napkins. Lucia, pale but furious, sat at the edge of the library sofa with a laptop and the copied ledgers. "The West Bay storage lockups cross-reference with the donor boxes," she said. "He'll try to burn paper before he boards anything." Dante stood at the head of the table, one hand flat on the map, cut at his ribs, freshly bandaged under his shirt. He should not have been upright. He looked more dangerous for the fact that he was. "You stay here," he said to Lucia. She glared. "I have eyes. And I have men, stay." He looked at me next. I knew that look now. The one that said he was about to do the thing that would most enrage him because it involved me. "No," I said immediately. His mouth almost moved. "I haven't spoken. You didn't need to." Marco put in, carefully. The lockups use old custom seals. She knows the pastry supplier codes Conti reused for the charity loads. It may help. Dante's gaze stayed on me. It may also get her killed. I'm already on the list, I said. At least let me be useful on purpose. The room went still. Lucia stopped breathing for a second. Gianni looked as if he wanted to wrap me in bubble wrap and bureaucracy. Dante came around the table, not close enough to touch. Close enough that the refusal in him heated the space between us. You don't come near the docks unless Marco says move and I say breathe. Charming. Not tonight. I nodded once. Fine. He held my gaze for a beat longer, checking whether I understood the cost. I did. That was the problem. The harbor at night smelled like diesel, tar, salt, and old decisions. We approached in 2 vehicles with lights off. The city behind us all sodium glow and church domes, the sea black enough to swallow names. Old customs warehouses crouched along the quay, rusted shutters, and narrow service alleys between them. Somewhere in that dark, Federico was trying to turn records into ash and escape on borrowed loyalty. I stayed in the second SUV with Marco until the signal came. The radio cracked once, then twice. Move, we went. Inside the warehouse everything echoed. Footsteps, shouted orders, the clatter of metal shelving, a forklift abandoned mid-turn. Crates stenciled with church charity seals stacked around a central loading lane. The air already carried the thin, terrifying scent of accelerant. Marco cut left with 2 men. I took the clipboard room on the mezzanine because Lucia had identified it as the place the custom seals would be kept. My pulse pounded against the old bruise memory in my wrist. I moved faster anyway. The room was a cage of glass and filing cabinets, 3 binders, 2 seal guns, 1 lockbox. I found the donor manifests and snapped pictures with the burner phone Dante had handed me, its screen throwing blue over my shaking fingers. Then footsteps thundered below. I looked down through the glass and saw Dante, gun in one hand, blood already at the bandage under his shirt, coat gone, fury stripped down to function. Across the loading lane stood Federico Conti in an immaculate navy suit, because some men insist on looking electable while the world burns. 2 guards flanked him. Behind him, one of the trucks was already backing toward the open quay. You always did like theater, Federico called. Dante kept walking. You set fire to a city and called it bookkeeping. Federico smiled. Please, Palermo likes being lied to. I simply invoiced the illusion. I moved for the stairs. Marco's voice hit my earpiece. Stay high. I found the manifests. Stay high. Then flames licked up the far wall where one of Federico's men had splashed fuel. So much for staying anything. I ran the side stairs with the lockbox under my arm and nearly collided with one of the guards coming up. He grabbed for me. I slammed the metal box into his nose. Bone cracked. He went backward into the rail. I kept moving. Dante saw me hit the floor and his face turned murderous in a whole new direction. Sophia, I have the seals. Federico's eyes narrowed. There you are. His hand moved. I didn't see the gun until Dante hit me. We went down hard behind a stack of charity crates stamped with saint names and donation numbers. The shot punched through wood where my shoulder had been. Splinters rained over us. Dante's arm wrapped around my waist, turning my body under his, shielding before strategy as if he no longer even remembered how to do otherwise. Tell me you're unhurt, he said into my hair. I'm unhurt. He looked at me once, fast, brutal with relief, then rose and fired over the crate. Marco's team came in from the west loading door. Bullets answered. Men shouted. One of the trucks roared, gears grinding. The whole warehouse became motion and smoke and the awful brightness of catching fire. I crawled to the next stack and opened the lockbox. Customs seal guns. Stamp plates. Exactly what Lucia said would prove the shipping fraud beyond donor paper. Marco, I shouted. He saw, pivoted, and tossed me his spare evidence bag in one clean motion. We had become a unit without anyone ever officially allowing it. Federico ran. Of course he did. He cut for the key door with one remaining guard and the kind of expensive cowardice that always expects an exit. Dante went after him. So did I, because apparently my better judgment had relocated without notice. Outside, the sea wind hit hot skin and smoke-stung lungs. The quay lights burned pale over black water. A launch bobbed against the lower ladder, engine running. Federico sprinted toward it. "Stop!" Marco shouted. Federico turned and fired wild. The shot sparked off bollard steel. Dante did not duck. He kept coming, terrifying in his certainty, until he was close enough that words no longer mattered. The last guard went for me instead, not because I was nearest. Because he knew what hurting me did to the geometry of every man on that dock. He lunged. I sidestepped badly, slipped on wet stone, and would have gone over the edge if Marco hadn't grabbed the back of my jacket. The guard swung again. Gianni, God help us all, Gianni appeared from nowhere with a harbor flare in one hand and drove it straight into the man's shoulder. The guard screamed. Gianni recoiled in horror. I hated that. I need everyone to know I hated that. Marco finished the man with one brutal strike and shoved Gianni behind a bollard. Why are you here? Because nobody tells logistics anything and I have a car, Gianni shouted back. Also, Rosa said if the boss dies before apologizing for Tuesday, she'll resurrect him herself. Even on a burning dock, I laughed. I think Marco did too, for one impossible breath. At the end of the quay, Dante reached Federico. No elegant duel. No speeches. Just one punch that sent the councilman into the steel ladder and another that took the gun from his hand. Federico hit back wildly, fear having stripped him of polish. Dante took the blows like weather and gave back something colder. Then Federico, bleeding and cornered against the Black Sea, spat, "She'll always be afraid of what you are." The words carried over the water. Dante stopped. I saw the choice hit him in profile. Kill him here. Become the story Federico predicted. Or leave him breathing and let the city watch him dragged into daylight with ledgers and seals and a priest prepared to testify. He stepped back from Federico, not because the man deserved mercy, because I was watching. Marco, Dante said. Marco understood at once. He and two of the dock men hit Federico from both sides, drove him to the wet concrete, and wrenched his arms behind him. Federico thrashed once, cursing through blood, then froze when Dante crouched in front of him and spoke in that same terrible quiet. You burn churches, businesses, girls, and call it order. Dante's voice did not rise. Now you get daylight. Then the warehouse behind us groaned. I turned. Flames had climbed the far loading bay, fast and hungry, reaching for the fuel drums stacked under the quay awning. A burst of sparks rained across the dock. Gianni, still half hidden behind the bollard where Marco had shoved him, looked over his shoulder and went pale. "Oh, now," he shouted. "Now we do fire." "Move," Marco barked. A fallen pallet had pinned Gianni's leg. I saw the red emergency wheel bolted to the warehouse wall at the same moment Dante did. ANTINCNDIO stenciled above it in peeling paint. "I can reach it," I yelled. Dante wheeled on me. "No, too late, I was already running." He swore and came with me, covering my body with his, as shots cracked somewhere behind us from one panicked holdout near the truck. I threw my weight against the metal wheel. It stuck. Dante's hand slammed over mine. Together we dragged it down. Foam cannons exploded from the awning line. White suppressant blasted over the drums, the truck hood, the spreading fuel sheen. Dante left me at the valve and tore toward Gianni, hauling the pallet aside with Marco a second later. Gianni limped free, clutching his chest. "If I survive this," he panted, "I'm eating tiramisu at breakfast and proposing to Rosa irresponsibly." "You're limping," Marco said. "I'm romantic under pressure." Sirens rose from the far road. Real police this time, real magistrate vehicles behind them. Blue lights broke over the harbor like judgment finally learning punctuality. Federico was dragged upright in zip ties, his suit blackened at the knees, his face ruined in all the petty ways vanity fears most. Dante looked at him once more, then turned away first. That was the victory, not clean, not bloodless, but chosen. When the officers took the ledgers, the customs seals, the priest's testimony, and Federico Conti himself, Palermo's old lie cracked open on the dock in front of all of us. Dante had won, but the price stood beside him all the same. The East Bay route seized with the evidence, 2 political shields gone, and the last of his trust in Vittorio buried with the night. He came back to me through smoke and foam and sirens, blood at his side and the sea wind in his hair. Looking less like the man from Chapter 1, and more like someone who had fought his own reflection and refused to keep it. I touched the bandage at his ribs, he covered my hand. And in the black, salt-cold wind of the harbor, with the city still burning off its lies behind us, Dante Salvator finally said the only words the night had earned. "It is over." 6 weeks later, Palermo looked the same if you were the kind of person who never learned where the city kept its uglier truths. The bells still rang over the old quarters. Priests still blessed boats. Women still slapped sheets from balconies above streets that smelled of coffee and hot stone. Men still lied beautifully in public and sweated honestly in back rooms. But some structures had shifted. Federico Conti was in a cell outside Messina awaiting charges that involved words his lawyers hated: trafficking, fraud, coercion, conspiracy, attempted abduction, arson. 3 of his donors had become witnesses. 2 priests had resigned. 1 had vanished to Argentina if Gianni was to be believed, which he usually wasn't until he unfortunately was. Dante had surrendered enough of the port ledgers to burn out the rot, without handing the entire city to worse men. It cost him the East Bay Customs route, a shipping arm that had made older members of his family both rich and insufferable, and every political favor attached to it. Men who once smiled at him over wine now looked away at restaurants. He slept better. He would not admit that, of course. But I had begun learning how he looked after real sleep. Less carved, less haunted at the edges, his mouth almost human in the first minute after waking. The bakery was being rebuilt. Not in the old location. I had mourned that already, standing in soot with my hands full of broken sugar molds and memory. Some places are too damaged to become home again just because you sweep them. So Dante bought a narrow stone storefront 3 streets from the conservatory and 1 block from a church whose bells ran 5 minutes slow. He claimed it was strategic. "It has better morning foot traffic," he said. "It has blue shutters," I replied. That too. Lucia called the new space hours with a possessive ferocity that made me suspect she had forgiven me before I forgave myself. She played violin in the back room while contractors painted walls, and Rosa bullied them into proper measurements as if pastry display cases were a military concern. Marco inspected the alley sightlines. Gianni brought catalogs for espresso machines and managed, somehow, to make sabotage possible in every sentence. "If you choose the chrome model," he told me one afternoon, grave with warning, "customers will think you are flashy. Flashy people order badly." "Order badly?" I repeated. "Yes." "Weak cappuccino, no conviction." Rosa, from atop a ladder with a tape measure, said, "No one has ever needed fewer opinions." He pressed a hand to his chest. "And yet you'd be lost without me." She came down 1 rung just to stare at him. "I would be calmer." He sighed toward heaven. "See, this is our dynamic." Denial and chemistry. It was impossible not to laugh. That, I had learned, was Gianni's secret talent. He took tension by the throat and made it ridiculous long enough for people to keep breathing. At the villa, life had changed in quieter ways. Lucia no longer flinched at gate noises. Marco had a healed graze at his shoulder and a new habit of checking every car twice. Dante spoke to magistrates through lawyers now, and to priests not at all. Vittorio had died 2 days after the monastery raid under guard at the clinic, lungs failing, secrets mostly spoken by then. Dante never said his name unless required. But one night on the West Terrace, when the sea was dark and the lemon blossoms had just opened, he told me. I used to think control meant leaving nothing alive in me that could be used. I leaned against the stone beside him. And now, he looked out toward the water, now I think dead things are easier to govern. Not better. That was as close to repentance as a man like Dante came without breaking his own jaw on the word. By then, I had already chosen him consciously, not because I misunderstood what he was. Not because he had dragged me somewhere and locked the gates. Because I had seen him at the monastery with Vittorio on the floor, and understood the precise nature of the choice he made when he turned away from becoming his mirror. Because when he could own, he restrained. When he could crush, he measured. When he could lie to keep me calm, he told me the truth and let me hate it. Love did not arrive like fireworks for me. It came more shamefully. In noticing I slept better when his footsteps were in the hall, in reaching for his hand once on instinct when Lucia laughed downstairs. In realizing that when the city frightened me, the thought that steadied me was his voice saying my name low enough to keep it intact. The first time we made love was not dramatic. No thunder. No blood on shirts. No enemies at the gate. It happened because one long day at the new bakery ended with flour in my hair, an ache in my shoulders, and Dante sitting at Rose's kitchen table after midnight with his suit jacket off and his top button undone, watching me wrap fig tarts for the morning. The house was quiet, Lucia asleep, Gianni gone after announcing that if Rosa ever smiled at him on purpose, he would become unbearable, Marco on perimeter, the old clock counting out harmless minutes. I set the last tart aside and found Dante still looking at me. "What?" I asked. He stood, came toward me slowly enough that I could have stepped away. I didn't. His fingers touched the flour at my temple, then the edge of my jaw. My whole body went still around that one careful contact. "You're tired, Lace," he said, and the nickname no longer felt like he was naming what I hid. It felt like he was naming the place in me he had learned to hold without tearing. "I know, come upstairs." The invitation was quiet, so was the fear that moved through me. I looked at his hand instead of his face. "If I come," I said, and my voice almost failed me on the word, "I don't want it because I'm grateful, or because I'm frightened. Or because tonight was easy and I confused easy with safe." His eyes darkened. He did not touch me again. "What do you want it because of?" There it was, the impossible question. The one I could not answer cleanly because I was still myself. I swallowed. "Because when it's bad, I look for you anyway." Something raw crossed his face. He closed his eyes once, opened them, and took one step closer. "That's enough." He kissed me in the hallway first, slow enough to stop, slow enough to ask and keep asking. My hands shook when they found his shirt. His did not because he felt less, because he had practiced carrying more. In his room, the marble was cool, the lamp low, the sheets turned down by someone with too much discretion. He touched me like a man learning a language he had once believed belonged to other people. There was hunger, yes, but there was also restraint threaded through every inch of it, reverence hiding inside danger so completely I nearly cried at the contrast. When I hesitated, he stopped. Every time, when I looked away, he waited, every time. And when I finally said his name into his throat like it cost me something, which it did, he answered by pressing his forehead to mine and whispering, "I know, Lace. I know." It was not the body that undid me. It was being treated as if my fear was not an obstacle to overcome, but part of the truth to be carried gently. After, I fell asleep with my face against his chest and woke before dawn to find him still awake, one hand loose at my back, staring at the ceiling as if peace remained suspicious. "You should sleep," I murmured. He looked down at me. "I am." That was the closest thing to a love confession we had then. The proposal happened 2 weeks later at Rose's kitchen table beside a loaf of bread and a knife still dusted with flour. No candles, no violin, no one kneeling in imported stupidity. I came in from the bakery site with paint on my wrist and found Dante alone at the table in shirt sleeves, a small velvet box near his coffee. My heart did one hard, humiliating thing against my ribs. He looked at me, then at the chair opposite him. "Sit. That sounds ominous." "It is." I sat. He slid the box across the wood. Inside was a plain gold ring, no diamonds, no performance. Just warm metal catching afternoon light. I lifted my eyes. "I can offer you my name," he said. "I can offer you the bakery deed in your name alone. I can offer you the right to refuse me and still keep both." My throat tightened. He continued before I could interrupt. I cannot offer you a harmless life, not honestly. There will always be parts of my world that stay dangerous. There will always be men who remember who I was before I learned certain costs. Silence pooled around us. In the corridor, I heard Rosa telling Gianni not to touch the peaches. He claimed he was only looking at them with ambition. Dante's voice lowered. But if you stay as my equal in the truth. Not hidden in it. I touched the ring but didn't lift it. This is the least romantic proposal in Sicily. Yes, I may need more poetry. He looked almost offended. I bought the ring. That made me laugh, which cracked something tender open in his expression. Then I reached across the table and put my hand over his. I don't want harmless either, I said. I want honest, and coffee, and the bakery, and Lucia arguing with your staff, and Gianni surviving impossible diets, and you coming home. His fingers turned beneath mine, holding. Yes, he asked. I nodded once. Yes. The relief in him was so deep it made his eyes close for half a second. When he opened them, he turned my hand over and kissed the inside of my wrist where the bruises had once lived. My lace, he said softly. The words landed with full warmth now. No possession sharpened into warning, just belonging chosen by both of us. Rosa walked in at that exact moment, saw the ring, and said, Good. Now perhaps someone in this house can stop pretending this was temporary. From the corridor, Gianni shouted, If there is cake. I'm breaking ketosis for love. There is no ketosis, Rosa called back. There was in my heart. I laughed so hard I had to put my free hand over my mouth. Dante watched me do it as if the sight still surprised him. That evening we ate at the long kitchen table with bread torn by hand. Wine Lucia declared too dry, and Gianni telling Marco that matrimony was a dangerous administrative choice. The house sounded ordinary in all the ways that once would have seemed impossible. And when Dante's hand found the back of my chair under the noise and light and familiar bickering, the gesture was so small it might have been missed by anyone else. By me, never. He reached for the bread, tore it cleanly, and passed half to me without looking as if the motion were habit already. Maybe that was the quiet miracle of it, not the ring, not the proposal. Not even the way my pulse still changed when he entered a room. It was the habit. The ordinary tenderness of a dangerous man learning to build a life he did not know how to want, until it was already standing in front of him with flour on its cheek and a laugh in its mouth. Later, when the kitchen emptied and the house fell into its midnight breathing, he found me by the terrace doors with my hand over the ring like I still needed to make sure it was there. You're thinking too loudly, he said. I'm engaged to a man who can hear thought now. That feels unfair. He came up behind me, not touching at first. Then his hand settled at my waist, steady and warm and chosen. Are you afraid? He asked. The honest answer took a second. Yes. Of me. I looked out at the dark garden. Of how much I would lose if something took you. His silence changed behind me, deepened. Then he bent and pressed his mouth to my temple. That fear goes both ways. I turned in his arms. No almost left between us now. No interruption. No question we had not already bled to answer. Outside, the sea kept its own counsel. Inside, the old house held our voices, and the sound of plates cooling in the kitchen and Gianni, somewhere down the corridor, arguing with Rosa that celebratory biscotti were medically necessary. Ordinary, radical as prayer. And when Dante took my hand and lifted it to his mouth, kissing the inside of my wrist where pain had once been written, I understood that peace did not arrive like innocence. It arrived like this. Chosen anyway. 9 months later, the lace whispered again. It was such a small sound, barely there. Ivory thread, skimming the inside of my wrist, as I pulled on the gloves in the back room of Belandi and Salvetor Pasticceria before dawn. The new shop smelled of yeast, espresso, lemons warming under the lamps, and sugar already melting into morning. I stood in front of the prep table, pinning my hair up with one hand and flexing the other. No bruises beneath the lace now, just skin. A faint sugar burn near my thumb, a gold ring, my own pulse. The bakery opened officially to the public at 7. But Palermo had already learned to cue early when Rosa threatened people with scarcity. Lucia was in the front room arranging flowers in old jam jars because she claimed expensive vases made pastries nervous. Marco had inspected both alley exits, the side courtyard, and the roofline before 6, and was now pretending not to drink a second coffee near the front window. Gianni, who had indeed proposed irresponsibly and been accepted even more irresponsibly by Rosa 3 months earlier, was pacing with a guest list for the private afternoon reception and panicking about chair symmetry like civilization depended on linen. "It does," he told me when I came through with trays. "People forgive crime. They do not forgive crooked place settings." Rosa, tying on her apron with the calm of a woman who had survived both blood feuds and Gianni's courtship, said, "If you keep talking, I'll sit you in the kitchen." He clutched the list to his chest. "On my wedding adjacent day, it is not your wedding. It is adjacent to love. The emotional radius counts." I laughed and set the tray down. At the center of the worktable sat 3 spun-sugar swans. Not 1, 3. Lucia insisted the display for opening day needed them because, according to her, you nearly ruined your life the first time one of those existed. So now they're symbolic. She said this while stringing citrus slices for garnish and pretending not to be sentimental. I had made them at midnight in the same silence I once used to survive, only now the silence belonged to concentration instead of fear. Delicate necks, gold-tinted wings. Mirror glaze beneath them catching the copper lights. Fragile things, beautiful enough to make a person careful. I reached to adjust the smallest swan's wing. The tray shifted. Instinct took me before thought. My gloved hand shot out and caught the base before the sugar cracked, saving the swan first, my own skin second, exactly as I had in the ballroom that night when everything broke open. A low voice behind me said, "There it is." I turned. Dante stood in the doorway in a dark suit without a tie, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a small paper cup of espresso from the machine Gianni had called respectable enough to die beside. He looked older than the man from the gala and younger than the man from the monastery. The edges had not disappeared. They had simply learned where to rest. His gaze was on my hand under the swan. "Of course it was. You move quietly for a man with this many opinions," I said. "I've had practice." He stepped into the room. The staff did what everyone always did when he entered, adjusted without dramatics. Lucia smirked at me and vanished to the front counter with a tray of cannoli. Marco looked once through the glass partition and away again. Rosa took Gianni's clipboard before he could narrate the atmosphere. Suddenly, we were almost alone in the back room except for the ovens and the breath of morning. Dante set the espresso down and came to stand across from me. His eyes dropped to the ivory lace. "New gloves," he said, "for sugar work. For armor? No," that seemed to matter. He reached out, slowly enough to stop. His thumb slid just beneath the cuff. The lace whispered over my skin. Same gesture, different life. Nothing in me flinched. His hand stilled there, warm and broad around the place where fear once lived. His gaze lifted to mine, and for one suspended second the entire story stood between us. Black gloves, ballroom light, bruises, blood on stone, bells, ledgers, fire, bread knives, ordinary mornings. "You still do it," he said softly. "Save pastry, protect the fragile thing first." I should have joked. Instead, I looked at the swan between us. Some things should not have to fall to prove they matter. His expression changed in that quiet way I had learned to read better than speech. Love, on Dante, always arrived like impact withheld at the last second. "In the beginning," he said, "I thought it unsettled me because it was foolish. And now," he glanced at my hand still under the swan base, then closed his fingers fully around it. "Now I know it costs you every time. That's what I can't get over." My throat tightened. That was the final bookend. The thing he had noticed in Chapter 1, admitted in Chapter 6, and recognized again now with all the names filled in between. I did not protect fragile things because I was too innocent to understand breakage. I did it because I understood it intimately and chose not to become its servant. Lucia called from the front, "If you two are having a cinematic silence, do it while carrying trays." Dante's mouth almost moved. "Romance is terrible for timing," Gianni added. Also, a woman outside says she came only because she heard the Mafia boss fell in love with a pastry chef, and now the cannoli have improved. Should I frame that? Put her in line, Rosa said. I believe in customer truth. You believe in hearing yourself. Dante took the tray from under my hand before I could argue. Front room, he said. That sounded like an order. It was a kindness. We moved into service side by side, shoulders brushing once in the doorway, almost nothing, enough to change the temperature of my day. The opening passed in waves of flour and laughter, and old women crying over sfogliatelle because it tasted like 1987. Lucia played violin by the window after noon, light pooling in her hair. Marco accepted an espresso from me without pretending he didn't want it and said, in the grave tone of a man issuing official assessment, "The alley sight lines are bad." "The pistachio cream is excellent," I smiled. "That is your version of approval, isn't it?" "Yes." By 3, the private reception began in the back courtyard under strings of white lights and lemon branches tied with ribbon. Not a wedding. Not exactly, more a blessing after survival. Family, the chosen kind and the inconvenient inherited kind. Lawyers, musicians, 2 magistrates with discreet appetites for pastry and justice. Even one priest Rosa tolerated because he paid his bills and minded his own absolution. Gianni cried during the toast before anyone else did. "I'm not weak," he told us all, wiping at his face. "I'm moved and underfed." "You have eaten 12 things," Rosa said. "That is not nourishment, that is emotional maintenance." Everyone laughed, including Dante. The sound of it still startled me sometimes. His real laugh was low and brief, and rare enough to feel like a room opening where no door had been before. When evening softened into gold, Lucia drew me aside near the courtyard fountain. "You know he watches your hands before anything else," she said. "I know, he always will." I looked across the lights to where Dante stood with Marco near the garden wall, listening to some shipping issue with the expression of a man whose empire still required maintenance, whether he loved someone or not. He lifted his head as if he felt my gaze and found me immediately. The world had not become safe. That was the thematic shadow we had earned the right to keep. There would still be men who measured Dante by older versions of himself. Still be nights when a late car at the gate changed everyone's posture. Still be choices neither of us would explain cleanly to gentle people. But I had chosen with full knowledge, and so had he. Later, after the last guests drifted out, and Rosa shooed Gianni toward his own house with enough leftovers to preserve civilization, I stood alone in the darkened bakery front room and looked at the reflection of the pastry cases in the window. My life had not become simple, it had become mine. Dante came up behind me, no words at first. Just the familiar gravity of him, the scent of bergamot and night air layered over clean cotton and a day lived fully. His hands settled at my waist. "Tired?" he asked. "Yes, happy," I let the question sit. Feelings still did not arrive in me as neat little labeled boxes. Maybe they never would. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm still learning what happens when fear isn't the first thing in the room." His forehead touched the back of my head for one quiet second. "So am I," I turned in his arms. There was flour at his cuff, a faint scar at his ribs beneath the shirt I knew by touch now. The face I had once feared had become the face I searched for in every doorway. I lifted my hand between us. The ivory lace caught the last light. He took it, and with a care so practiced it broke my heart a little every time, peeled the glove off finger by finger. The whisper of lace over skin filled the bakery's quiet, no bruise beneath. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist. Same place, completely different meaning. "My lace," he said, warm, earned home. And because ordinary life had become the most radical thing in the story, we locked up the bakery together, checked the ovens, argued gently about whether Lucia had left violin rosin on the sideboard again, and went upstairs to the apartment above the shop where our real life waited in half-read books, cooling tea. and shoes kicked beneath the bed. At the bedroom door, I stopped him. "Dante," he looked down. "Back then," I said, "if you hadn't taken my hand," I didn't finish. There was no clean ending to that sentence. There never would be. Maybe that was the unresolved thread the heart keeps even after the plot is done. Not whether love was worth the cost, but whether survival changes, shapes so completely that you stop recognizing the girl who first needed saving. He touched my face. "You would still have found your way to me," he said. I didn't know if that was true. I only knew I wanted it to be, and maybe that was enough. Would you have chosen Dante, knowing loving him meant stepping into a world that could never be entirely safe?